It's rather surprising, and I promise you I don't mean this to be insulting, because I definitely place you considerably higher than most of the apologists that I've engaged with. But there's a common theme from the apologists, and that is, you're not really an atheist because. Now, in Dr. Peterson's case, it's, you're not really an atheist because, in my mind, an atheist is someone who would be a murderer. And so I'm just, rather than saddle you with that, you just think you're an atheist, but really you're not.
Hey, what is going on, everyone? Genuinely so glad you found this one, because this exchange is on a completely different level. What you are about to watch is Matt going head-to-head with Jordan Peterson in a live debate in front of a packed audience. The conversation covers God, morality, consciousness, the value of religion, and whether atheism is even philosophically coherent. But the moment that changes everything is when Jordan pulls out one of the most famous novels in Western literature to argue that a true atheist would reason their way into justifying harm. And then Matt responds, and the room goes completely silent before it erupts. Every second of this buildup is worth it, so stick with it all the way through. The final few minutes are the reason this clip exists. One thing I always love is seeing where you all are watching from. Whether it is late at night, somewhere in Europe, or early morning in Southeast Asia, just drop your location in the comments and say hello. All right, here we go.
Well, thank you both for a very interesting and revealing exchange. My question is for you, Dr. Peterson. You alluded to an important distinction between someone who would actually be an atheist and someone who merely professes to be an atheist. You implied that Matt and others are not genuinely atheists. I'm curious why you think that. Is it just because we have sacred values, that everyone has sacred values? What, in your view, would a genuine atheist be like?
He'd be like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. And I can't really come up with a better answer than that, because it's such a complicated question that that's the right answer. You know, I love that book. It's an amazing book, and it's a great thriller, by the way. If there are some of you, perhaps many of you, who haven't read it, you really should read it, because it might be the greatest novel ever written. I think you can make a case for that. It's unbelievably exciting once you get into it. And Raskolnikov, he plots the perfect murder. It's so interesting because Dostoevsky, the last thing Dostoevsky ever did was make a straw man out of his opponents, let's say. What Dostoevsky did in all of his great novels was make his enemies, let's say, or make each of the positions that he was trying to contend with as powerful and admirable as he possibly could. And since he was an absolutely spectacular genius, he could really do that. And so Raskolnikov plots a murder, and he murders this horrible woman, who's horrible according to everyone who knows her, who also has enslaved her rather mentally feeble niece, and who does nothing but make people miserable consciously all the time. And he does that in order to save his sister from a rather sophisticated form of prostitution, to save himself from starvation so that he can become a great lawyer and help people. Right? So Dostoevsky sets up the stage. Here is the perfect situation for a murder, and all of the rational choices point in that direction. And Raskolnikov, who's also sort of torturing himself, or sort of tortured because he's sort of hungry and not very well, not thinking very clearly, he undertakes the murder, and he gets away with it. And before he does it, he berates himself in what I would describe as the negative atheistic style. And he basically says, look, there is every rational reason to split this woman's skull with an axe. Look at all the good I would do. Look at all the well-being I would enhance. And so he does it. And then all hell breaks loose. And
this is the moment the debate stops being philosophical and becomes personal. Because what Jordan Peterson just did is not make an argument. He made a characterization. And the characterization is this: if you are a real atheist, a logically consistent atheist, you would reason your way into doing harm. Let that land for a second. A person sitting in front of a live audience just told another person that the only reason they are not a harmful individual is because they are not actually an atheist. That is the argument. And Jordan dressed it up beautifully. He reached for one of the most celebrated novels in all of Western literature to do it. You have to understand what is happening here intellectually. Jordan is not making a clumsy attack. He is making a sophisticated one. He is using Dostoevsky, specifically Crime and Punishment, to argue that without a metaphysical moral foundation, pure rationality leads a person to justify the unjustifiable. And the setup Jordan describes is genuinely compelling on its face. The character Raskolnikov does not act out of hatred or impulse. He builds a rational case. The woman he targets is described as someone who makes everyone around her miserable. He has reasons, good reasons by utilitarian logic. He calculates that the greater good is served by his action. And Jordan's point is that when Raskolnikov strips away the metaphysical, when he tells himself there is no God and no cosmic rule stopping him, reason alone is not enough to hold the line. Here is what makes this educationally fascinating. Dostoevsky wrote Crime and Punishment in 1866, right at the peak of the nihilist movement in Russia, when young intellectuals were genuinely arguing that morality was a social construct and that rational actors should be free from inherited ethical constraints. Dostoevsky was terrified by this. He wrote the novel as a direct response to that movement, so Jordan is not casually invoking a literary example. He is pulling from one of the most deliberate philosophical novels ever written. That context matters enormously for understanding why Jordan reaches for it here.
What Dostoevsky see, Raskolnikov built himself up to the murder in part by laying out the rational case, but also by saying, well, there's no God. There's no metaphysical reason that's stopping me from committing this act. And there's all these reasons that appear perfectly rational, pushing me in that direction. Perhaps I'm nothing but a moral coward for failing to undertake it. So he does. But what he finds out is that he broke an inviolable moral rule, something that spoke to his own soul, so to speak. And the rest of the book basically involves his sequential post-traumatic unraveling. And the post-traumatic issue is very interesting because one of the things you do see happening with post-traumatic stress disorder is that it very often occurs in people who watch themselves do something of great malevolence. By their own admission, I'm not projecting this onto them. They've watched themselves they've stepped outside the ancient moral code unwittingly and conducted themselves in a manner they cannot reconcile themselves to, and they are permanently broken. So there are works like that, Crime and Punishment, first and foremost, I would say, that do a lovely job of elucidating in narrative form how these self-evident moral presuppositions are necessarily nested inside this broader narrative metaphorical substrate, and that you use your rationality divorced from that metaphorical substrate at your peril. And I believe that to be the case. I think that's an accurate psychological summation.
Thank you. I'm curious if Matt has any thoughts on the matter.
You think?
I have plenty.
So it's rather surprising, and I promise you I don't mean this to be insulting because I definitely place you considerably higher than most of the apologists that I've engaged with. But there's a common theme from the apologists, and that is, you're not really an atheist because. Now, in Dr. Peterson's case, you're not really an atheist because, in my mind, an atheist is someone who would be a murderer. And so I'm just, rather than saddle you with that, you just think you're an atheist, but really you're not. From other apologists, it's you think you're an atheist, but you're not, because God's written his moral code on your heart. Is what this is essentially as far as I can tell, what was expressed in some way, that there's a moral foundation, a moral center that God has imbued people with, and that we all know this, or we all recognize it, or you're not really an atheist, or this is what an atheist would do. An atheist is somebody who doesn't believe there's a God. I am not convinced there's a God. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm convinced there are no gods, although that is a subset of, hey.
And here's where the argument reveals its own problem. Because Jordan finishes the Raskolnikov case and the applause settles and Matt stands up, and what Matt does in the next few minutes is not get defensive. He gets precise. And that precision is devastating. Jordan essentially argued that a true atheist would reason the way Raskolnikov did, stripping away the metaphysical and concluding that without God, there is no barrier to harm. And Matt immediately names the pattern. He says this is not just Jordan's move. This is a common move from apologists. The message is always the same. You are not really an atheist because a real atheist would behave badly. And then the goalposts shift, depending on who is saying it. This is the part that blows my mind. Matt points out that Jordan's specific version of this argument is perhaps the most sophisticated version he has encountered. But the underlying logic is identical to the street-level version, whether it is Jordan citing Dostoevsky or someone else saying God wrote his moral code on your heart. The conclusion is the same. You cannot be a good person and a genuine atheist. One of the two has to give. And then Matt draws the clean line that Jordan never drew. An atheist is simply someone not convinced there is a God. That is the entire definition. It says nothing about morality. It says nothing about meaning. It says nothing about whether a person can experience wonder or purpose. The moment you start adding conditions to that definition, the moment you say a real atheist would behave a certain way, you have stopped describing atheism and started describing a straw man that was built to make a theological point.
I don't believe there's a God, and then there's a subset that is, I believe there are no gods. This is, as I've talked about previously, independent of whether or not I can be a moral being or do good things, is independent from whether or not there's awe and wonder or purpose and meaning in my life. In much the same way that, previously they wanted to kind of say, oh, this is a secular humanist, regime that was just awful. Well, it wasn't secular humanism. There were atheist fans who wrote me that were like, oh man, I can't wait till you do this conversation with Jordan. And I was like, cool. And still, I hope that we have many more conversations as well, because just saying one thing that I find irritating is never going to be enough to get rid of me. But I asked them, great, I'm not that familiar with him. What is it about him that you like, and what are the concerns? And they came back with a bunch of things. None of them said anything about agreeing with views on religion. They seemed very confused on those things. And so the good news for them is that while he thinks atheists would be murderers, he doesn't actually think you're an atheist. And that is his way of getting around acknowledging things that conflict with his worldview. I don't get to decide who is or isn't a true Christian. I didn't even get to decide that when I was a believer. I definitely don't get to do it now. So if somebody tells me they're a Christian, I'm going to have to accept that. I have a model in my head of what that means. I have a model in my head of what it means to be a Muslim, but I'm willing for them to explain to me what their model is. I know people who identify as Christian atheists. They really love the stuff that Jesus said, but they don't actually believe there's God. Thomas Jefferson famously cut out the Jefferson Bible and removed every reference to the supernatural and miracles and things like that because he really admired the teachings of it. And sure, I think you could be a cultural Christian in that if you wanted to. It's strange to me that I'm not sitting here with somebody like Ray Comfort when I'm told you're not really an atheist because you're too good to be an atheist. And this is what atheists hear all the time when they come out. They've been sidelined because of religious privilege around the world for years. And then atheists come out to their family members or friends or people they've known for years, and they're like, you're an atheist? How can that be? You're such a good person. I've known you all this time. It's because the mindset of what people have about what an atheist is has been poisoned by religious proclamations. We have been denigrated from the pulpit, and it has seeped into every aspect of culture, right up to the height of intellectual pursuits.
That final line. The moment Matt says it is time for that to end, you feel the entire weight of what just happened in this debate land at once. Because Matt did something in this segment that goes far beyond winning a single argument. He traced the history of a pattern. He showed that the claim you are too good to be a real atheist is not a compliment dressed as philosophy. It is a mechanism. It has been used for generations to keep atheists quiet, to make them feel like they owe their own decency to a framework they rejected, to suggest that their goodness is borrowed from a source they will not acknowledge. And here is what strikes me most about the way Matt handles this. He does not lose his composure. He does not attack Jordan personally. He draws a direct comparison, noting that he is not sitting across from someone like Ray Comfort, who makes blunt, unsophisticated versions of the same argument. He acknowledges that Jordan's version is more intellectually dressed, but dressed up or not, the effect is the same. Atheists have been told for years by family members, by friends, by communities they grew up in, that their goodness does not belong to them, that it is evidence of something they denied, that the very qualities they are most proud of are proof they are wrong about what they believe. Matt says atheists come out to the people who have known them their whole lives and get told they are too good to be what they are. Think about what that actually means for a person. You spend years working through your beliefs, honestly. You arrive somewhere real. You tell the people closest to you, and the response is not engagement. It is invalidation. Your own morality is used as a weapon against your identity. The culture that produces that response has been built deliberately, and Matt naming it out loud in front of a live audience, directly to one of the most intellectually formidable people making that case today, is exactly why this moment matters. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.